Well, hello. Good evening, everyone. This is Sneakers Corner, and with us today again is Murad. I'm going to be talking today about Muhammad's wives. In fact, his single and only wife. But before I begin, I just want to hand over to Murad, who wants to say a few things.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me again. I just want to say thank you for all the comments, and especially to someone called Betsy and another person called John, I guess, because they write very good comments and they're very keen listeners. And you can comment now.
Okay. So, my case today is that Muhammad didn't get married until his conquest of Palestine in either 633 or 634. Um, and I believe he was only married once and that he died 2 years later. And this is quite a controversial opinion to have, but actually it is based on 7th century sources. So, to begin with, I'm going to refer to Sebius. And Sebius talks about the fact that the Jews wanted to form an alliance with the Arabs in order to kick out the Byzantines. And he says the following: 12 peoples representing all the tribes of the Jews assembled at the city of Edessa. When they saw that the Persian troops had departed, leaving the city in peace, they closed the gates and fortified themselves. They refused entry to troops of the Roman lordship. Thus Heraclius, emperor of the Byzantines, gave the order to besiege it. When the Jews realized that they could not militarily resist him, they promised to make peace. Opening the city gates, they went before him, and Heraclius ordered that they should go and stay in their own place. So they departed, taking the road through the desert to Tagistan, Arabia, to the sons of Ishmael, which we read to be the Arabs. The Jews called the Arabs to their aid and familiarized them with the relationship that they had through the books of the Old Testament. Although the Arabs were convinced of their close relationship, they were unable to get consensus from their multitude, for they were divided from each other by religion. So I'll just cut from this for a moment. So they had an incentive because they wanted the Arabs to form an alliance. They had an incentive to make contact with anyone who could get everyone organized together. So he goes on to say, concerning Muhammad, he says, at that time, a certain man from among these same sons of Ishmael, whose name was Muhammad, a merchant, as if by God's command, appeared to him as a preacher and path of truth. He taught them to recognize the God of Abraham, especially because he was learnt and informed in the history of Moses. Now, because the command was from on high, at a single order, they all came together in unity of religion. Okay, so obviously there's no reference to him having a wife or that the Jews gave him a wife in this source. But what's key there is they saw the need of contacting the Arabs and arranging an alliance. Now, a typical situation when a group wants to form an alliance with another tribe or people was to form an alliance around a marriage between both sides. And interestingly, the Ten Kings Midrash, which is dated to about 744, so this is 8th century, and used an early source called the Apocalypse of Rabbi Shimon ben Yohei that is dated to between 635 and 645, so the very early 7th century source. This source and later sources that copy from it indicate the Jews believed that the Ishmaelites, and especially Muhammad, would free them from the yoke of the Byzantines. It says, at the beginning of his dominion, when he goes forth, he will seek to do harm to Israel, but great men of Israel will join him and give him a wife from among them, and there will be peace between him and Israel. He will conquer all of the kingdom and come to Jerusalem and bow down there and make war with the Edomites, i.e. the Romans, and they will flee before him, and he will seize the kingship by force, and then he will die. Okay, so as we can see there, it first says that Muhammad was ill disposed towards the Jewish people. It says he will seek to do harm to Israel. So the leaders of Israel respond to something that Muhammad has done. So he's done some form of aggression towards them, and they give him a wife as a form of appeasement and to form that alliance that was mentioned in the other source. Now, interestingly enough, Thomas the Presbyter in 640 confirms that that being Muhammad, initially sought to harm Israel, as it reports the killing of 4,000 poor Christian Samaritans and Jews in Palestine. So there's a confirmation from 640. The Jewish leaders form an alliance with Muhammad through marriage, and they offer him a Jewish wife. Now, the key thing, and this is not often thought about by many of the scholars, is as this was the Jewish leaders that are initiating this, so they're not being forced to do it by Muhammad. They would not be doing this if Muhammad was already married, because according to Jewish beliefs, this would amount to adultery. So they don't believe in polygamy, certainly not in the 7th century. So if he was already married, this wouldn't have occurred. So that means that Muhammad must have been single pre this date of 633 or 634. So it indicates that he was not married at that time. Now, it could be that he married before, but as I'm going to indicate in a short while, I'm going to indicate that he was relatively young at this stage. So I would indicate that he was about 44 years of age based on another source that I have. So while it is not impossible, it's likely that he was single up to this point because of the fact that he was living a nomadic lifestyle of working as a merchant, going up and down, maybe didn't have much time to arrange such things. But in any case, at this time in the key part of his life, he is married to a Jewish woman, just one single woman. We can deduce that Muhammad lived for only 2 years after his invasion of Palestine by examining the chronological charts of Jacob of Edessa, who wrote in 691, 692. While Jacob of Edessa gets the date of the beginning of Muhammad's reign and the overall length of his reign wrong, he nonetheless indicates that Muhammad entered Palestine during his 5th year and dies during his 7th year, which would mean that he dies 2 years after his marriage to his Jewish wife. So that would give us a date of 635, 636 for his death, and obviously the end of that marriage. So the other source, which would suggest that Muhammad was about 44 at the time of his marriage, is the following. The Chronicle of Theophilus of Edessa, again another Edessa source, which was written in 750. This source was lost, but we have a number of chronicles that scholars have determined used a common source, which is this Chronicle of Theophilus. And a key quotation that occurs in them is the following. Therefore this Muhammad, while in the measure and stature of youth, began to go up and down from his city Yathrib, or Medina, to Palestine for the business of buying and selling. And while he was engaged in this region, he encountered the belief in one God, and it was pleasing to his eyes. And then it says, and when he went back down to the people of his tribe, he set this belief before them, and when he persuaded a few, they followed him. And then it goes on to explain how he started going up to Palestine, making raids and so forth. Now, if we use other sources that would indicate 610 or thereabouts was the time that the Arabs began to do raids into these countries because of the security breakdown, and we think, well, what age would he have been to be in the measure and stature of youth? I think a fair indication might be 18, 19, maybe 20. That would put his birth at somewhere around 590 to 592 or 3. So that's why I think this is significant, and that's why I believe when he got married he was about 44 based on all of those sources. So hand over to Murad and like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, if we examine who is Muhammad's wife and we look only at the outside sources, outside of the Islamic traditions, we will find that there is no source whatsoever who recognize Aisha, but we find only vestiges for Khadija, but with a twist. So I think the source you were quoting, which is Theophanes the Confessor, I believe, maybe it's in the 9th century. It says that he took over the business of his wife of selling and buying, and we know from the tradition that Khadija is the one who had caravans and who was rich, and this fits with Petra. It fits that she was from the Nabateans who had a good trade, and she was rich. And I think he also said that she was his relative, and this twist is not in the tradition. So if we now, and if we examine who was the wife of Muhammad, which is the Jewish wife, let's see if this fits Khadija. Khadija, if you look well into the tradition, you will find that she was maybe an historian Christian, and her relative is Warqa ibn Nufal. He was also a Christian, but this guy Theophanes, he refers to him as her friend, not her relative. So
Okay.
I will just put this question as, was he her friend? But the narrative, the Islamic narrative, puts it as a relative because it's not good for a woman to have a male friend. I don't know, but it's certainly a twist.
So
Um,
you're
yeah.
suggesting that this could be possibly a Jewish woman with a Christian friend. You know, if we were to go along that line.
No, I'm saying that there is no vestiges to Khadija being Jewish whatsoever.
Oh, okay,
Even
okay, yeah.
yes.
I
So
actually
she
don't.
was, yeah.
I'm just going to say, in my initial reaction, just from what you said there, is it doesn't fit because the sources that I've read would suggest that he started his buying and selling by himself when he was young. It didn't depend on anyone else. He just simply went up and down, and he led others along as well. It didn't require him to have a contact in any shape or form. And the fact that he was located in Yathrib doesn't quite fit with a Nestorian connection either. Do you think?
I'm not sure if I'm recalling the right source, but there is a source which says that he married his widow, married a widow wife who were older than him, and you see this classically fits Khadija. So the outside sources only have vestiges for Khadija, or they have like the same story twisted here and there. And if we look at early depictions of Khadija, of course, we do not have anything that it's early enough. But the earliest you can find around maybe the 16th century, the French guy, he drew her in a Christian fashion. So they see her more as a Christian.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there. One of my theories I have is that Aisha and Khadija were just simply the product of hadith makers, and that I think the story of the young girl was originally, as we call today, Aisha, was originally Khadija, and then because her name was so obvious, they changed it because it did. People just laughed because it was so obvious that it was a made-up story. Because if anyone who's watching and has access to Google, if you Google Khadija and the meaning of the name, it actually translates as premature daughter, or if you like, prepubescent girl, is one potential way of translating the name, and that fits in my mind more with Aisha. So that would suggest that there's been some tampering with names and the stories in order to make them work better. What's your thoughts on that?
I will get to the names because I have this ready. But let's look at Abu Bakr first. Who was he? And then we will get back to the names if you like.
Okay, fine. We'll just leave that out there for the minute, or maybe I'm jumping the gun.
Yes, I have the names and why I think that the names are opposite. Like Aisha is opposite to Khadija. But let's just look at Abu Bakr first and see where he fits. Now, I got this from someone called Omar Nainawa, and this guy, he came up, he is an Iraqi, and he came up with this interpretation after reading the book of A.J. Deuce, which is The Great Leap Fraud Part 2. And he argues that Quraysh were actually Levite Jews. Now, let's look at Abu Bakr, what Omar Nainawa is saying. Abu Bakr, surrounded by Hebrew names such as Sadiq, Bokr, or Isha, was of high rank. He was the first leader after the Prophet. He was not an ordinary person. Now let's look at the Arabic. His name in Arabic is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Now when you ask a Muslim, what is a Siddiq? He says, because he saddaq, he believed the Prophet, he was first of the believers. But in Arabic, you cannot say this word. You can say Musaddiq. This is believer. But Siddiq is very weird. So here Omar Nainawa is saying, could Siddiq be Saddusi?
Wow.
At Saddiqim, which is formed the plural of Saddiq. As a caliph, he would carry the correct Hebrew title of the Sadduqis, that Saddiq, which would turn to be the Levite lineage.
Can I just jump in with just a quick response there? One of the things that I've discovered recently is that the Syriac word Quraysh means an alliance or confederation. And it's my belief that this Quraysh was a creation of Muhammad, who brought together these different clans and included the Jewish leaders in this Quraysh or alliance. And so it would not surprise me if one of the Jewish leaders was placed in a high rank as part of the agreement between the various groups. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the word Quraysh in its very first original form, as Gabriel Sauma says, it's like cow herder, like the people who raise the cows. Like Qurashi is a cow herder male, and Qurashiyya is a cow herder female. And we have no traces of Quraysh. We don't know where these people were. So that's why Deus, he suggested that they were the Levite Quraysh and they were the people of the Kaaba and so forth. Actually, I don't really buy it. There is no enough evidence to suggest it. I think that Quraysh, it only appeared once in the Quran, and people, they did not understand it, so they had to fit it to the tribe later of Quraysh.
Yeah.
I want to say also that Joseph of the Old Testament, in the Arabic, they sometimes call him Yusuf al-Siddiq. This is the same word as Abu Bakr. So, is Abu Bakr a Jew from the Sadducees? This is the question.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not entirely sure if there was any traces of the Sadducees in the 7th century, because it seemed to be the Pharisees that formed the tradition of the Jews from then onwards, because once the temple was destroyed, which the Sadducees had a hold of, there wasn't a lot of room for the Sadducees from then on. But perhaps the family line continued on, so maybe that's right. I'm not sure.
Well, I don't say that this is totally correct, but this is what Deus came up to after examining the evidence starting from the very beginning. So if one wants to know about this, he should read The Great Leap Fraud Part 2 by Deus, and he came to this conclusion.
Cool.
Now, if you want me to jump to Aisha, who is she, and her name and appearance and all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Uh, the word Aisha, in Arabic, if you read it, it's Aisha. And you have this Aisha. If you write it, you have to write like a comma.
Yeah,
And this is the Hamza. This was added later.
yeah,
So the archaic form of the word would be Aisha.
yeah.
This word Aisha, in Hebrew, it means a woman. So this is a Hebrew word. When
Wow.
it when it became Arabized, it means alive. Aisha, it means alive.
A liar, as in someone who tells lies? I've heard you right.
Alive, alive, alive.
Oh, alive. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
This is the Arabic meaning.
Yeah,
Now, when you say Aisha, which is how you should say it now in Arabic, it has this Hamza. And if you remember, Hamza is like a mini Ain. It's a small Ain.
mm.
Now the question is, when was this Hamza added? Actually, the one who added this Hamza, his name is Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, and this is the Islamic tradition saying this, not me. This guy was born in 718, which is 110 AH.
Wow.
So this means that Aisha, her name was Aisha, if she did exist and all of that, her name was Aisha, not Aisha.
Yeah. So do you reckon that it could be that that would indicate that her name and her story was invented in that
Maybe.
time frame?
Yes,
Yeah.
this maybe this could be the case.
Yeah.
Now,
Because
yes, go on.
Robert Spencer talks a lot about the 700s, say from 700 to 720 as being a real high point for Hadith creation. So that would fit in nicely with what you just said.
Yes, Al Khalil, he was born 718. So he didn't
Yeah.
add the Hamza when he was born, he added it a little bit
Oh,
later.
yeah,
I'm not
sorry.
sure the date.
Yeah, okay. So we could be talking 750, 760, 770, something like that.
Maybe. And the
Yeah.
book that he did, it's called Kitab al Ain, which is the book of the Ain. And he made this mini Hamza. Mini Ain, I mean, this is Hamza.
Yeah.
And I will put on the screen how the name Aisha, it got the Hamza over it, and how it looked back then and now how it looked. So when we say Aisha in the English form, it's more like the archaic way of how we should say it.
All right, okay. And so are you reasonably confident that this was originally a Jewish name?
Not necessarily, but Gabriel Salma, he didn't say what this name means.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Now, if we look at the names, you have Khadija, and Khadija means like stillborn, or like it just
Premature
got
girl.
born.
Yeah.
Hence, dead. And who is saying this? Someone called Janssen, Hans Janssen. He was a parliament Arabist in the Dutch parliament, and he knows Islam very well. He passed away, but he knows this very well. And I will give you the link that you can add. And he is talking about this part. So Khadija and Aisha, they could mean something different. This one is dead, this one is alive. Something like
Ooh.
this is a new age or something.
That's interesting. I didn't realize there was that kind of echo between the two names. So that's an interesting angle there. I hadn't come across that before.
Now, this is about the name. If we look at the age, how old was Aisha when she married Muhammad? This is the $1,000,000 question. And the tradition, it simply says she was 6 and then they got married like at 9. But
Yeah.
you have problems with this narrative. And I will give you also a link that you can add, and it says, was Aisha a 6-year-old bride? And this guy, he gives multiple evidence that she was 18. Yes, he is a Muslim apologist, and I'm not saying he's 100% trusted, but the evidence he gives is very good. And it only suggests that these people didn't know how old was Aisha.
Yeah, yeah. I think that whole tradition of her being really young is very doubtful. I think that's more likely people exploiting people's gullibility. Perhaps there are people that wanted there to be a very lenient approach to underage marriage at the time in the 8th and 9th century, or perhaps it represented the values of the Arabs and the Persians in the 8th and 9th century much more than it being connected historically.
I want to give you a very small glimpse of the evidence that this guy is saying.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, is the reliability of the source. Who is the person who, if you go in the chain of Isnad, who gives this that she was 6 and 9 and stuff? It's only one person called Hisham ibn Urwa. Only one person who is reporting on the authority of his father.
Can you just say, sorry, can you say his name again? Is it Hisham Marwar?
Hisham ibn Urwa means Hisham, son of Urwa. Ibn is like bar. It's the same, the Hebrew way. You know, this guy, son of this guy.
Yeah, yeah. Oh God, that sounds like a Jewish name then, is it?
This is the Jewish way of saying things. The older Sahaba, the companions, they have a Jewish way of naming people. Ibn Fulan, like Ibn Zubair, son of. And same, this is like Joseph, son of Caiaphas.
Yeah.
Now, if you notice that these narratives, they were in Iraq. Hisham ibn Urwa and all this stuff. And of course, this guy here is saying it's not very reliable because it was far in Iraq and stuff. But he doesn't know that maybe Iraq was much closer. But this is evidence number one. If you want me to go to evidence number two.
Please do, yeah.
Evidence number two, Aisha was betrothed at 7 years of age and began to cohabit with the Prophet at the age of 9. Now here, Al-Tabari says, all 4 of his, which is Abu Bakr's children, were born of his 2 wives during the pre-Islamic period. So here you have a problem. If Aisha was betrothed in 620 at the age of 7 and started to live with the Prophet in 624 at the age of 9, that would indicate that she was born in 613 and was 9 when she began living with the Prophet. Therefore, based on one account of Al-Tabari, that was Al-Tabari, the numbers show that Aisha must have been born in 613, 3 years after the beginning of the revelation, which is 610. Tabari also states that Aisha was born in the pre-Islamic year in Jahiliyyah. If she was born before 610, she would have been at least 14 years old when she began living with the Prophet. Essentially, Tabari contradicts himself.
Oh, that is interesting. So potentially she would have been what age did you say when they first betrothed? Did you say she could be potentially 14? Was it?
Yes, she could be 14 based on Al-Tabari, who contradicted himself.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, they don't know. And if you compare Aisha, and I will not go very much into detail, maybe people can read this paper, it's very long. The age of Aisha in relation to Fatima. If you compare and do the math, you will come up that Aisha at her marriage would be 12. And if you look at other evidence, Aisha's relation to Asma, which is her sister, it says Asma was 10 years older than Aisha. And it says here that if Asma was 27 or 28 years old at the time of the Hijrah, Aisha should have been 17 or 18 years old. Thus, Aisha being 17 or 18 at the time of Al-Hijrah, she started to cohabit with the Prophet at either 19 or 20 years of age.
Yeah. To me, that sounds like it's more plausible, that sort of an age. You know, I don't think that that incredibly young age that the Islamic tradition suggests is very plausible, very likely. It's for one thing, I'd imagine that would destroy a person's image in a community that are only beginning to come around to following him. It's not like 100 years later where the community has fully bought into him as being a prophet. I can't imagine, even a very liberal community being okay with that, even at that time. So I think it's probably more likely that he married someone that was, at least 14.
The paper that I will give you, that you will put the link in the comments, it's very clear and makes a very strong case that she was not 6 and she was not 9. So the question is, why did this tradition come up, which is that she was married at 6 or 9? This is the question.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer is a speculation. I speculate that Aisha, she was like against Ali. So this is the Sunnah against Shia. And if you want to put lots of hadith on the tongue of Aisha, you have to make her much younger, because there is no much time left. So she has to be very young.
How do you mean? Do you mean so that she lives for decades afterwards in order to pass on the message? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean if she married the Prophet very young and she lived with him like 10 years or something, it's like if you are a pianist and you learn piano since you were very young.
Yeah.
So they had to make her this age. So when Abu Huraira puts lots of hadith on her tongue, you would believe her. If she is too old, then there is no much time.
I don't quite follow you, because I can't see why that would be a problem. If she's really young, the difficulty is that she's not going to be able to absorb the information, for one thing. Let's say she married at 20 and lived for 10 years with him. Doesn't that still allow her to?
Yes, but the chronology would collapse.
Yeah.
But yes, so you have to put her at 6, and he married her at 9, so that she had lots of time. She lived with him lots of years, and this is only speculation on my part. It's not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is right. And the other thing is, why did they come up with this? Is maybe there were caliphs in the Abbasids that were pedophiles, and they came up with this tradition so that they say, well, the Prophet did this.
Yeah, I think that side of things is very likely. And
that's more plausible, yes.
Yeah, I think actually with power and money and the prevalence of sex slaves and so on, it's very convenient to justify yourself with reference to Muhammad, and you can put anything onto him or onto like Aisha and say that it was all justified, and so therefore it's a clean slate, So I think that's very likely in terms of where the story came from and why they created that story.
Yes, they definitely did that, and they did it a lot. So there is no problem in this part.
Just as a precedent for that, which fits in with this, the Zayd and Zainab story, which is found in the Quran, has a similar kind of idea behind it, because it creates a story about a couple and adds a weird element to it, which basically justifies the abolition of adoption. And the purpose behind it is twofold. First of all, it's to confirm that Muhammad is the last of the prophets, because they believe that prophecy was something you biologically inherited. So they wanted to cut off not only the biological possibility of someone being another prophet after him, but also even someone being a son by adoption. And so they're prepared to even include a really kind of racy, saucy sort of a story even in the Quran to fit their propaganda purposes. And also the other thing is attacks a key tenet of Christianity, which is the idea of being adopted sons and daughters of God. So it's basically it's two bangs for the buck kind of thing, you know.
Yes, and I can add also another element, something I found
Hmm.
2 days ago, is that there is a similar story to Harun al-Rashid with someone which is similar to Zayd and Muhammad's story. So I really do think that these are the things that the caliphs did, and they attached it to Muhammad. And
Hmm.
the people who, the scribes who were writing, they walked by the Quran, so that everything they said had to fit with what the Quran is saying. And they didn't really understand what the Quran was originally saying, and they didn't also care.
No, it doesn't seem like they actually genuinely believed that it was a true revelation from Allah, because I can't imagine them making all these edits and so on if they really believed it was from God, because they would surely have been reluctant to do that. So it kind of like there's like an in story and an out story. Like within the inner group, they know it's a farce and they know it's just propaganda, but everyone outside the core group doesn't know what's really going on, and they're being fooled. It's a scam, in other words.
Yes, I think this is what happened. And actually, even in the tradition, you have like these scribes saying that once the caliph was eating something, I'm not sure what is in English, let's say an apple, and he really liked it, the scribe would write like poems on why the apples are so good. And the other day, if he doesn't like it and he doesn't want to eat it anymore, they write an opposite poem against it. And even the caliph, he says, "What are you guys doing?" They say, "Well, we are working for the caliph, not for the apples. We will write whatever you like, whatever you want." So
Yeah.
even in the tradition, it's very clear how these people were writing.
Yeah, they have no compunction to be truthful in any way. It's whatever the person in charge wants, that will be done.
Yes, actually, in Islam, anything you can find it, and you can find contradictory evidence against it from within the traditions.
Yeah,
Even if God is one or a Trinity, you
yeah,
can come up with with things saying He is Trinity. Even the word Tawheed, it means like combining. So
yeah.
you're not combining one thing; it's at least two things. Yes, I can move on now to the appearance of Aisha, if you like.
Please do. Yep.
Now, what did Aisha look like? They always say in the Sunnah and in the Shia that she was Humayra. Humayra is like small Hamra, like small red, hence redhead. So, a small redhead. But when you read, yeah, when you read in the Islamic sources, they say that Humayra doesn't mean red, it means white. So, extremely white.
Mm.
Actually, there is no contradiction. A redhead is usually white.
Yeah,
So, so maybe she was a white redhead or something.
yeah, yeah.
This is the appearance, and I'm asking, is this the appearance you find in Mecca, Saudi Arabia?
Well, I don't think she'd last too long. She'd die of skin cancer within a few months, I think.
Yes, exactly. And they say this, of course, as something to honor her, because in Islam, if you say someone is white, that is good, and the black is bad. You see, the racism is very clear in these parts.
Well, actually, if you just go across the Gulf to India, like even today, you hear many Indian people making a preference for whiter people over darker people in terms of marriage. So those attitudes are still there, and the the caste system is very much a racist one. The whiter the better kind of thing.
Yes, you have this especially clear in the tradition. You have a tradition that Muhammad told the followers, if you go and invade Tabuk, you will get uh, the people of the white skin and gold hair, like the Byzantines or something.
Yeah,
And this is always in the mindset of Muslims. They like the blonde hair and the white skin, they think this is like a different race, a much better race. Like this is, and you see, this is like the Huri, like the women you get in paradise.
Yeah.
They have white eyes and they are white.
Actually, even in Ottoman times, this was the preferred sex slave to be captured around Europe. That so they charge higher prices for them. So obviously, things didn't change all that much over the centuries.
Yes, it was higher price than the black ones, and they took them and they didn't take the males. They only took the female. They were called harim. Still in Arabic, you have this word harim.
Yeah.
They had something called haramlik in Ottomans, which is the place only where you have these women. And they put with them someone who is a black slave, and they castrate him so that he does not sleep with them. And they choose him to be black because if he sleeps with them and if she has a child, he will be black and it will be easy to notice.
Cheapers, yeah. Yeah.
Let me go back to who killed Muhammad, and now let's look at Aisha again.
Yeah.
The Shia sources, they clearly say that Aisha is the one who poisoned Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sunni sources, they say that it was a woman, a Jewish woman, at the Battle of Khaybar. She gave him something to eat, you know the story, of course, and then after 3 years, the poison killed him. Mm-hmm. Of course, this is unbelievable. The Shia story is more plausible. And what I'm saying here is, could this be the same woman that the Sunni sources are referring to? This Jewish woman, could this be Aisha? And could this be the Jewish woman that Sham'un Bar Yochai is referring to?
Yeah, certainly it's possible. One of the problems with the Jewish woman poisoning Muhammad was the fact that why would someone who has a wife take food from a random stranger and eat it? That goes against every principle of security. It makes more sense for the Jewish woman who's cooking for him to be his wife or some close contact. That doesn't make sense. Yeah.
You see, the Sunni are the Aisha campaign, and the Shia is the Ali campaign, and they had this battle of the camel. So are the Aisha campaign, which are the Sunni, trying to cover up what Aisha did, and they put this story on a random Jewish woman, and they gave her a name and so forth? This is the question.
Yeah.
Mind you, I think, yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Mind you, there are sources that I've read which strongly suggest that the means of Muhammad's death was a wounding or a massacre, which sounds to me more like maybe a sword wound rather than a poison. I think this poisoning story was just a misdirection story to get rid of the tradition of how he died in battle in Syria in about 635, 636. But I'll just leave it out there.
I will disagree with you.
Okay.
Because, because in Islam, the best thing is to die a martyr in battle. So if the Prophet died a martyr in battle, they will definitely put this in the tradition and they will make it even bigger and bigger. So he just died from poison. It suggests that it happened not the other way around. And the Shia and the Sunni, they both agree on the same story. So maybe this is what happened.
Yeah. I would say the trump on this, though, I think, yes, in normal circumstances, they would have taken that over any other form of death. But I think that they wanted to extract him from Syria entirely because of the nature of what happened to his body after he was buried. And the story I mentioned in an earlier video that they were expecting him to rise from the dead, and he didn't. And when his body was rotting, dogs came in and took a flank out of his body. And so, therefore, to cover up that entire tradition, they made up a completely different scenario where he was poisoned by a woman in Khaybar, and then he died when he was in Medina. So they basically have him dying in his own bed rather than in Syria. So they went to an extreme. Rather than him being miles away in Syria, they have him in bed. But here's the interesting thing: there is a reference in Ibn Ishaq, which says that when Muhammad was in northern Syria, when he was a child, someone came up to him and said that if he returned to Syria, he would die there, which is a strange prophecy. If the tradition is correct that he actually died in Medina, it just seems like an anomaly. And I would suggest that maybe the reason why that was remembered was because that prophecy had come true, that he had died in Syria. And so that's like a remnant from that early tradition.
I also don't agree with you again. Sorry.
Okay.
The story that his body was eaten by dogs, I think you came up with the key, and that is that the people who were writing this, they were religious people, and they say this like in the Book of Kings, which you referred to, so that when a reader reads this, he is 100% sure that he was a false prophet. So maybe this story was not what happened.
Yeah.
Because these sources are still also very late, if you remember. The one which says about Muhammad, it's in the 800s. So you don't have this in the original form.
Yeah, I'd have to look up the original source again just to confirm one way or the other on that. I haven't got it to hand.
If you want to rely on that he went to Palestine,
you're right.
Have the...
Yeah, it does say, it's in the Story de Muhammad. It comes from the 850s, so it is quite late. Mind you, it does appear in the Bahira legend as well. So there's two separate traditions, but again, that could be that it's a late tradition, so you may well be right. The only thing I would say against that, and this is maybe something you haven't considered, perhaps, I'm not sure. If Ibn Ishaq had already established that Muhammad was buried in Medina, and he's writing in the 760s, well, this story makes no sense if it was created post 760, because if people already believe he died and was buried in Medina, there's no way a story about him dying in Syria would ever take off or even be listened to. It suggests that the story happened before a time that people knew about Medina and that he was died and buried there. I think that's a case that Stephen Shoemaker would make quite strongly, that it indicates that it's come from a much earlier tradition. And in fact, I think he suggests that it's probably a 7th century tradition originally. But we'll probably agree to disagree on this one.
I think there is a big problem about Medina. Where is Medina? And this is, we discussed this in another video.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that Yathrib in Saudi Arabia was the Medina whatsoever. The Medina was maybe in Iraq, or maybe it was Petra, or it was Syria, or something like this. So, but I'm still like, I know the Muslim mindset. Yeah. I still can't get around the idea that he died in battle and they chose to think that he died of poison. I still cannot get around this. It doesn't make much sense.
I think it's a double bluff, though. Here's my counter argument, right? Yeah. Because people expect that they wouldn't possibly not celebrate the fact that he died in battle, by creating this story, it's a clincher. Like, people will definitely believe it must be true because of the alternative. You know, I think that it's an act of misdirection. It's a juicy story with the poisoning and the Jewish woman and so on, that it just is irresistible in terms of it as a story. And actually, it's a more interesting story as well, rather than just a straightforward, mundane dying in battle, even though that's quite a heroic type of thing. But
I can add one thing to your benefit here. The Quran says that a false prophet, they will cut off his aorta.
Yeah.
And they have in the tradition that when Muhammad was dying, he says, I feel that my aorta is being cut off. And David Wood, he did a very good video about this part.
Yeah.
So like maybe these people, yes.
Yeah. So maybe that is the wound, you know, from a sword. That actually he literally had a wound, maybe a wound to the neck or something like that, that would actually fit more closely with that than the poisoning story. But that's an interesting point. I didn't consider that side of it, actually.
It may be that this was the poison that they put inside the tradition so that you drink it, that you know that Muhammad was a false prophet. Maybe, and maybe something else. If he did get poisoned, like if you want to poison me, I will think like, I'm very tired. I don't want to die. I will say something like this. I will not say, I feel that my aorta is being cut off. This is very fake, and it
Yeah.
fits with the narrative of the Quran that we will cut off the aorta of a false prophet. So this is very important. Why they chose the poison story?
Yeah. I think the fact that he wasn't able to foretell that the poison was in the lamb as well, it's kind of a bit obvious that, okay, he said the lamb spoke to me, but it's a bit late after he's eaten it. So it's kind of indicating that it's a tradition where people are presenting him as a false prophet, and doesn't bode well as a story either way.
It seems that the people who were writing, they wanted to demonize him more than honor and venerate him. I don't know how,
Yeah,
but this is what's going on.
Yeah.
They make the Quran fit to another person. And actually, we can do another video on who was the real Muhammad, the historical Muhammad, because there is another hypothesis that he was someone else altogether, someone, Al-Ahmed king from Iraq, and then they added the name Muhammad to him, because you see, there was no one called Muhammad before Muhammad, and this is very important to know why. It was originally like a title.
Yeah, I do think that the name wasn't his original name. I do think it was a title that was received. So I think I'd be inclined to go along with that. I'm kind of the opinion that, looking at the evidence of the Jews going to the Arabs and wanting to form an alliance, the fact is that at least one source that I've read suggests that Quraysh means alliance, and that his tribe, the Tayyei, is suitably located in the Nabatean area at the time, would kind of fit with that. But then a Lakhmid king might work as well, but I suppose we'd have to examine who were the kings in the first few decades to see how that would fit in. Off the top of your head,
find the kings.
Okay, so we might be able to identify which king would fit with Muhammad and the timeline, maybe.
Yes, this is a hypothesis by A.J. Deuce, and it says that the real Muhammad could have been someone called Iyas ibn Qubays. So, but I don't want to get too much into this. Let's make this to another talk.
Yeah, definitely. We'll come to that. So, thank you, Murad. That was a really fascinating discussion we had there, and we covered quite a lot of ground, and I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate all the hard work you put into that today, and hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you very much for having me.